The palace was a gilded cage, beautiful yet suffocating, and Katerina had spent her entire life pretending to be the perfect daughter her parents demanded her to be. She learned how to bow her head, how to lower her voice, how to smile just enough to appear charming but never enough to seem improper, and yet in the quiet of her heart she burned with rebellion, with the insatiable desire for a life that was her own. Nights she would lie awake in her chamber, staring at the velvet canopy above her bed, imagining what it would feel like to walk the world as a man, free of the suffocating rules that dictated every breath of a woman in court. It was that hunger for freedom that gave birth to Sir Alexander, a carefully crafted persona forged in stolen hours and reckless courage. With her brother's discarded tunics, boots hidden under her skirts, and the confidence she never could wield as Katerina, she built a new self, tall, commanding, daring. The first time she stepped into the streets as Alexander, she felt the entire world shift, as if she had finally inhaled her first true breath. People treated her differently. Merchants bowed, guards addressed her with respect, and women glanced shyly from behind their fans. In Alexander's skin, she was untouchable, powerful, someone who could write her own destiny. And yet there was always one shadow she could never outrun, the luminous figure of Princess Isabella. From the first moment Katerina had seen her, she had known that her heart no longer belonged to her. Isabella was light incarnate, with golden hair that caught the sun like fire and a laugh that seemed to thaw even the coldest winter. But loving her in silence was torment, for Katerina knew the princess's path was carved by politics, not by desire, and that no woman could ever hope to stand beside her in truth. Until the night of the royal proclamation changed everything. Katerina, dressed in her finest gown as the obedient daughter she was expected to be, had stood among the sea of nobles as Isabella ascended the dais. The princess's voice, steady yet tinged with a nervous tremor, carried across the marble hall as she announced that at the upcoming grand ball, she would choose a suitor, and that suitor would become her betrothed. A collective murmur spread like wildfire, women fanning themselves furiously, men already envisioning crowns upon their brows, and Katerina's heart shattering quietly in her chest. But as she stood there, choking on the reality that Isabella would soon belong to another, a dangerous thought sparked in her mind, wild and impossible, yet intoxicating. What if Sir Alexander attended the ball? What if the charming cavalier who had already earned whispers of admiration at court suddenly appeared before the princess? Could she, Katerina, hidden behind the mask of Alexander, win even a fragment of Isabella's heart, even for a single dance? That night, as she slipped back into Alexander's attire in the safety of her chambers, gazing at her reflection in the mirror, she no longer saw the meek daughter bound by society. She saw a man who could rewrite the ending, a man who could seize what Katerina alone could never dare reach. For the first time in her life, she allowed herself to dream not of obedience, but of possibility. And as the grand ball approached, Katerina vowed silently. Alexander would not just attend. Alexander would dazzle. The night of the grand ball arrived like a storm the entire kingdom had awaited. Lanterns burned bright across the palace, music spilled from open windows, and silken gowns and embroidered coats filled the glittering hall as nobles from every corner of the realm gathered to witness history unfold. Katerina, no longer the obedient daughter, but the daring Sir Alexander, stood at the threshold of the ballroom. She adjusted the collar of her finely tailored doublet, the polished boots that gleamed beneath her cloak, and the mask of confidence she had practiced until it felt like second nature. Her heart thundered in her chest, not with fear of discovery, but with the dizzying thrill of possibility. When the herald announced Sir Alexander of Valmont, a hush rippled through the crowd, curious eyes turning toward the tall, striking figure who stepped forward with the easy grace of a man born to command. Conversations faltered, whispers began, and already Katerina could feel the weight of admiration pressing in around her. She bowed with just the right touch of arrogance, lips curling into a smile that left more than one lady swooning, before striding confidently into the heart of the ballroom. And there, standing beneath the golden chandelier, was Isabella, The princess was a vision in silver silk that shimmered like starlight, her hair braided with pearls, her eyes catching Alexander's from across the room in a glance that seemed to stop time itself. Katerina felt the air leave her lungs, her disguise trembling at the edges not from fear but from the sheer force of longing. Yet Alexander did not falter. Instead, she moved through the crowd like a knight cutting through battle, until at last she stood before the dais, bowing low with perfect precision. "Your Highness," Alexander murmured, her voice lower and richer than her own, steady despite the fire raging within her. Isabella tilted her head, curiosity glimmering in her gaze as she studied this newcomer who carried himself with such magnetic confidence. Around them, other suitors hovered impatiently, eager to claim the first dance, but it was Alexander's presence that seemed to draw Isabella's attention like a flame calling to a moth. When the music swelled and partners sought each other out, Alexander extended a gloved hand toward the princess, bold and unflinching. A murmur of shock rippled through the assembly. No one had expected a stranger, a mysterious cavalier without title, to claim the first dance with the heir of the realm. Yet Isabella, lips curving into the faintest smile, placed her hand in his. The hall erupted in whispers as Alexander swept her onto the polished marble floor. Their bodies moved in perfect sync, the princess's gown swirling around them as if even the fabric conspired to draw them closer. Every step, every turn was electric. Isabella's eyes locked onto Alexander's as though trying to unravel the mystery behind them. "You dance well, Sir Alexander," she said softly, her voice carrying just enough warmth to stir Katerina's soul. "For a man I have never seen before, you move as if you've been raised within these walls." Alexander's lips curved into a smirk. "Perhaps I was simply waiting for the right reason to appear, Your Highness." Isabella's cheeks flushed faintly, a spark of intrigue lighting within her eyes. Around them, the court buzzed with envy and speculation, but in that moment the rest of the world ceased to exist. For Katerina, hidden beneath the mask of Alexander, it was both agony and ecstasy to hold Isabella so close, to feel her laugh vibrate against her chest, to know this fragile illusion was the only way she could taste such bliss. And when the music ended, leaving them breathless, Isabella lingered for the briefest moment longer than propriety allowed before withdrawing her hand, though her gaze clung to his as though reluctant to let him go. That single look was enough to ignite Katerina's resolve. Alexander would not simply dazzle tonight. Alexander would claim the princess's heart. The echoes of the last notes of the dance lingered in the ballroom like smoke, trailing behind as nobles whispered furiously, some scandalized, others enthralled by the audacity of the mysterious Sir Alexander. Katerina could feel the heat of those countless eyes upon her back, yet none of them mattered because all she could see was Isabella, her luminous presence burning brighter than every candle that illuminated the vast chamber. As the next partner eagerly approached the princess, Isabella demurely excused herself, her gaze lingering on Alexander for a heartbeat longer than custom allowed before she turned away, offering her hand to another suitor. Katerina bowed courteously, retreating with careful control, though inside her chest her heart pounded with such violence she feared it might betray her disguise. Every nerve in her body screamed with exhilaration. She had danced with Isabella, not as Katerina, the overlooked daughter trapped by the cage of courtly obedience, but as Alexander, the daring cavalier who had made an entire kingdom stop and stare. She slipped through the edges of the ballroom, nodding politely when addressed, but offering little more than the enigmatic smirk that now defined her alter ego. Conversations swirled around her. Who is this Sir Alexander? From where had he come? What lands did he rule? Was he the son of some distant noble family returning to claim glory? Katerina allowed the questions to hang unanswered, for the less people knew, the more powerful Alexander became. Yet beneath that mask of intrigue lay the raw truth that if her deception were revealed, she would not only lose Isabella forever, but likely face ruin, disgrace, perhaps even punishment that extended beyond herself. Still, she could not resist the magnetic pull of Isabella's gaze. Every time the princess turned, Every time laughter slipped past her lips, Katerina's heart was ensnared anew, and it became harder to remind herself that this was a game she could not afford to lose. When the formalities of the evening demanded Isabella's presence elsewhere, Katerina slipped quietly from the ballroom into the cool night air of the palace gardens. Moonlight poured across the marble paths, the perfume of roses and night-blooming jasmine filling the air. She removed her gloves and let the night wind cool her heated skin, every sense heightened, every shadow carrying the weight of her dangerous secret. She had come here to breathe, to steady herself, to remember why she could not allow her heart to run away with impossible fantasies. But destiny had other plans. Footsteps echoed softly against the stones, delicate and unmistakable, and when Katerina turned, her breath caught in her throat. Isabella stood at the garden's entrance, her silver gown glimmering under the pale moon as though she were a vision conjured by desire itself. For a fleeting moment, Katerina believed she'd been discovered, that the princess had come to unmask her deception, yet the expression on Isabella's face was not suspicion but curiosity, tinged with something softer, something dangerous. "You've vanished so quickly, Sir Alexander," Isabella said, her voice low but clear, carrying the quiet authority of a woman who had never once been denied what she sought. "Was the ball not to your liking, or do you prefer the solitude of shadows?" Katerina inclined her head with practiced ease, her voice steady though every fiber of her being trembled. "I find shadows to be more honest than crowded halls, Your Highness. In shadows, there are fewer masks, fewer performances." Isabella's lips curved faintly, as though amused by the irony she could never suspect. She stepped closer, her perfume mingling with the night air, and Katerina's pulse thundered as the princess came to stand within arm's reach. "And yet you, too, wear a mask, do you not?" Isabella's eyes sparkled as if she were teasing, but beneath her words lingered a note of sincerity, a probing curiosity that made Katerina's breath falter. For a heartbeat, Katerina feared the princess saw through everything, but Isabella only tilted her head, smiling softly. "You are unlike any man I have ever met, Sir Alexander. You speak differently, you move differently. Most men rush to fill the air with boasts, yet you allow silence to breathe. I find that refreshing." Katerina forced a roguish smile, leaning closer, letting Alexander's charm carry what Katerina's fear could not. "Perhaps, princess, I am not here to impress the court. Perhaps I am here for only one person." Isabella's breath caught, so subtly most would have missed it, but Katerina felt it like a spark igniting in the dark. The princess averted her gaze briefly, the faintest blush coloring her cheeks before she looked back at him, her voice softer now. "And who might that be?" Katerina's heart screamed the truth, but she cloaked it in Alexander's daring smirk. "If I spoke it aloud, Your Highness, it would no longer be a secret worth guarding." Their eyes locked, the air between them thick with unspoken longing, with tension so palpable it seemed even the moon held its breath. For the first time in her life, Katerina felt Isabella's gaze not as the unreachable dream of a princess, but as the searching eyes of a woman, curious and perhaps longing in return. The sound of footsteps broke the fragile spell as a guard appeared at the garden's entrance, bowing hurriedly. "Your Highness, the Duke of Arundel seeks your presence inside." Isabella's expression flickered with irritation, her gaze lingering on Alexander as though reluctant to leave. "Duty calls," she said softly, her voice laced with regret. "But perhaps, Sir Alexander, you will grant me another moment before the night is over?" Katerina bowed low, her lips curving into that daring smile once more. "For you, princess, I would grant 1,000. Isabella's lips parted in a breathless laugh before she turned, gliding back toward the light of the ballroom, leaving Katerina standing in the moonlit silence, her chest aching with equal parts joy and despair. For though she had stolen a piece of Isabella's attention, perhaps even sparked the beginnings of something deeper, the weight of her deception grew heavier with every step. She could not deny the truth. Alexander had enchanted the princess. But sooner or later, Isabella would demand to know who this mysterious cavalier truly was, and Katerina's fragile dream could shatter into ruin. Still, as she touched the place where Isabella's hand had rested in hers, Katerina swore to herself she would not retreat. If she had only this brief masquerade, then she would make every heartbeat burn with meaning. The palace was never a quiet place, but after the grand ball, it seemed to hum with a different energy, a restless buzz that filled every corridor and whispered through every chamber. Katerina felt it the moment she returned as Sir Alexander the following evening. The court had taken notice, and it was not just admiration. It was hunger, suspicion, envy. Everywhere she walked, heads turned, conversations halted, and eyes lingered too long. Love what you've seen so far and want to help me keep creating these awesome stories on this channel? Then subscribe and hit the bell. Your subscription supports the channel and makes sure you get more exciting stories. Some looked at her with fascination, others with calculation, and more than a few with thinly veiled hostility. The court was a battlefield without swords, yet Katerina knew she had just walked into the heart of war. Isabella, bound by duties that required her to entertain a parade of suitors, maintained her composure, smiling, laughing politely, her poise as radiant as ever. Yet her eyes betrayed her. Whenever Alexander entered a room, they sought him out instinctively, as if tethered by an invisible string. It was a dangerous dance, one played out in subtle glances and fleeting touches, a hand brushing against his when passing a goblet, a look that lingered a fraction longer than decorum allowed, a laugh that was warmer when he stood near. Katerina lived for those stolen fragments, but each one fed the flames of jealousy in the hearts of others. Whispers of intrigue began to swirl. Who is this cavalier who appeared from nowhere, whose boldness had won the princess's favor? Among the loudest voices of discontent was Lord Damien, the Marquis of Rothermere, a man whose ambition was matched only by his arrogance. He had long believed himself destined for Isabella's hand, and the sight of her eyes sparkling for another filled him with a fury he could barely disguise. It came to a head 3 nights after the ball, during a gathering in the Great Hall, where nobles played at politics beneath chandeliers of crystal and musicians filled the air with a gentle backdrop of strings. Katerina, standing in her Alexander persona, conversed easily with a cluster of courtiers when Damien's voice, sharp and booming, cut through the pleasant murmur. "Sir Alexander," he declared, his words weighted with disdain, "a name we have only just learned, and yet you walk these halls as if you own them. Pray, tell us, what lineage grants you such confidence? What lands grant you such respect?" A hush fell. Dozens of eyes shifted toward Alexander, eager, predatory, sensing blood. Katerina felt the weight of the challenge, the danger of being exposed. For a heartbeat, fear clawed at her chest, but she forced herself to stand tall, her smirk practiced and effortless. "My lineage, my lord," she replied smoothly, "is not carved into stone or proclaimed in gilded words. It is written in the way I carry my blade, in the way I stand, in the respect I command without needing to beg for it." Gasps and murmurs filled the air. Damien's face flushed crimson, his pride stung by the cavalier's defiance. He took a step forward, hand resting on the hilt of his ceremonial sword. "Fine words. But words do not make a man. I propose a test of steel, here and now. Let the court see if Sir Alexander is worthy of the honor he so boldly claims." The hall erupted in noise, half in shock, half in excitement. A duel. Though blood was rarely spilled within the walls of the palace, honor demanded satisfaction when challenged so directly. Katerina's heart pounded, her mind racing. She had trained in secret, wielding a blade with her brother in stolen hours, her skills sharpened by necessity, but this was no quiet practice. This was a public trial. To falter was to invite humiliation, to risk exposure. And yet, as she glanced toward Isabella, who stood frozen with worry painted across her delicate features, Katerina's resolve hardened. She could not back down. Bowing slightly, she allowed Alexander's smirk to return. "If it is honor you seek, Lord Damien, then I shall gladly grant you a lesson in humility." The hall exploded with shouts. Servants hurried to clear the space, and within moments the polished marble floor became an impromptu arena. Nobles pressed close, their faces eager, hungry for spectacle. Damien drew his blade with a flourish, steel gleaming beneath the chandelier's light, his grin predatory. Katerina, suppressing her trembling hands, unsheathed the rapier she carried at her side, the weapon feeling both foreign and familiar in her grasp. The duel began. Damien lunged first, aggressive and overconfident, his strikes heavy, designed to overwhelm. Katerina parried swiftly, her movements fluid, her body recalling every stolen hour of practice, every cut and thrust her brother had drilled into her. The clang of steel rang out, echoing through the hall. Gasps and cheers punctuated each movement, the court divided between admiration and disbelief. Sweat trickled down Katerina's neck beneath Alexander's collar, but adrenaline sharpened her focus. Damien pressed harder, his frustration mounting as each of his attacks met with precise defense. Katerina, reading the arrogance in his every move, bided her time, waiting for the moment when his rage would leave him open. And when it came, a reckless overextension of his blade, she struck, twisting gracefully, disarming him with a clean flick that sent his sword clattering across the marble. The hall erupted, half in cheers, half in scandalized cries. Damien stumbled back, humiliated, his chest heaving as he glared at Alexander with murderous loathing. Katerina lowered her blade with practiced elegance, offering a mocking bow. "It seems, my lord, that words are not the only thing I wield with skill." Laughter and applause broke through the crowd. Some clapped in genuine admiration, others merely delighted in seeing Damien brought low, but all eyes were fixed now on Alexander, the mysterious cavalier who had dared to outshine them all. Yet it was Isabella's gaze that mattered most. She stood at the edge of the crowd, her lips parted, her eyes wide, not with shock but with something deeper, pride, admiration, a spark of longing that made Katerina's knees weak. The duel ended, but the consequences had only begun. Damien's pride was shattered, and with it came the certainty that he would not let the insult rest. Katerina knew she had just made a dangerous enemy, one who would stop at nothing to uncover her secrets. Yet as she sheathed her blade and caught Isabella's gaze one last time, the corner of the princess's lips lifted in a smile so small and fleeting that only Katerina could have seen it. And in that moment, despite the peril, it was worth everything. The days following the duel were filled with restless whispers that slithered through the palace like smoke, winding their way through corridors, drifting from lip to lip, twisting into speculation that grew wilder with each telling. Sir Alexander had become the name on everyone's tongue, a mystery to some, a savior of romance to others, and a thorn in the side of those who felt their chances with the princess slipping away. Where had he come from? Who were his parents? Why had no one heard his name until now? The unanswered questions made him all the more fascinating, all the more dangerous. For Katerina, it was both triumph and peril. She had stood her ground in the duel and won the admiration of the court, but in doing so she had placed herself squarely in Damien's sights. She could feel his eyes on her whenever they crossed paths, his pride festering like a wound, his smirk promising revenge. Yet even with that shadow looming, the thought of Isabella eclipsed everything else. Isabella had smiled at her after the duel, not with politeness or obligation but with warmth, with something that stirred hope in Katerina's chest despite all reason. It was that smile that carried her through sleepless nights, that made her willing to gamble her very life on this dangerous masquerade. 2 nights after the duel, Katerina received the message. It came not with fanfare but in the careful hands of a young maid who slipped it into her palm with eyes lowered. The parchment was folded into a neat square, the seal pressed not with the royal crest, but with the simple mark of a rose. Katerina's breath caught as she broke it open, her hands trembling despite the steady facade she wore as Alexander. The note was brief, the handwriting elegant and unmistakably Isabella's. Tonight. The library. After the candles are dimmed. Katerina's heart thundered so loudly she feared others would hear it echoing in the halls. She folded the note back into her palm and walked away with measured steps. But inside, she was already aflame. The hours crawled, every tick of the clock an eternity, every rustle of silk and laughter of nobles in the corridors nothing but background noise to the anticipation building in her chest. When the palace finally grew quiet, when torches burned low and servants retired to their quarters, Katerina donned Alexander's cloak and moved through the shadowed halls with silent steps. She knew the path to the library well, had walked it often in the daylight as Katerina, but tonight it felt foreign, charged with danger and desire. The heavy wooden doors creaked open softly, revealing the vast chamber within, its shelves rising like towers, filled with volumes of history, poetry, and forbidden knowledge. Moonlight streamed through tall windows, casting pale beams across the floor, and there, standing near the central table, her gown a cascade of ivory against the shadows, was Isabella. The princess turned at the sound of the door closing, her eyes meeting Alexander's with a mixture of relief and nervous excitement. "You came," she whispered, though her voice carried the weight of command even in its softness. Katerina bowed, her heart racing. "You summoned me, Your Highness. How could I refuse?" Isabella's lips curved into a faint smile as she gestured for him to come closer. Katerina crossed the room, each step echoing against the marble, each breath heavier than the last. When she reached her, Isabella's hands rested lightly on the table, her fingers brushing the edge of an open book. "The court cannot stop speaking of you," she said, her voice calm, though her eyes betrayed the storm within. "Some call you a hero, others an imposter, and I do not know what to call you." Katerina leaned against the table opposite her, meeting her gaze with Alexander's steady intensity. "Call me whatever you wish, princess. I will answer." Isabella's eyes lingered on his face, studying, searching, as though she might peel back the mask with nothing more than her gaze. "You intrigue me, Sir Alexander. You move through the court as if you were born for it, and yet you appeared from nowhere. You carry yourself with the confidence of a seasoned knight, and yet no one knows your name. Who are you, truly?" Katerina's breath hitched. For a moment she was caught in the knife's edge between confession and concealment, her heart aching with the desire to reveal everything, to lay herself bare. But she could not yet. So she let Alexander's smile tilt into something roguish, something enigmatic. "Perhaps mystery is my greatest armor," she said softly. "Perhaps if I told you everything, you would find me far less interesting." Isabella's lips parted as though to reply, but no words came. The silence stretched between them, thick and electric, broken only by the faint rustle of pages as a breeze stirred through the library. Slowly, cautiously, Isabella stepped closer. Her hand brushed the edge of Alexander's cloak, not quite a touch, more like a question. "You are bold," she whispered, her eyes locked on his. "Bold enough to claim the first dance. Bold enough to face Damien with steel. And now bold enough to meet me here alone. Do you not fear what would happen if the court discovered us?" Katerina swallowed hard, forcing Alexander's calm to remain even as her pulse raced. "I fear nothing when I stand before you." Isabella's breath caught, her lashes lowering briefly before she looked back at him, her eyes shimmering with something vulnerable, something dangerous. The air between them grew heavier, charged, and for a heartbeat it seemed the world itself held still. Katerina longed to reach for her, to close the aching distance, to let her lips brush the mouth she had dreamed of for years. But Isabella was still a princess, still bound by the weight of her crown, and it was she who finally broke the silence. "You speak as though you see me not as a princess, but as a woman," she said quietly. "And that frightens me more than I can admit." Katerina's voice softened, the truth bleeding through despite the mask. "Then let me say it plainly. I do not see a crown when I look at you. I see the woman who steals my breath with every glance, who makes a room brighter simply by standing in it." Isabella's lips trembled, a faint smile breaking through, fragile and luminous. For a moment, she looked away, gathering herself before meeting his gaze again. "You must leave, Sir Alexander." If anyone were to find us, her voice faltered, betraying a longing that contradicted her words. Katerina bowed, forcing herself to step back, though every fiber of her being screamed to stay. As you wish, princess. But know this, if you summon me again, I will come. Always. Isabella's eyes lingered on him, and for the briefest instant her hand lifted as though to reach for him, but she let it fall, clutching the edge of the table instead. Go, she whispered, though her eyes begged him not to. Katerina turned, her cloak sweeping behind her, her heart pounding as she left the library, the memory of Isabella's nearness burning like fire against her skin. She had risked everything tonight for a few stolen words, a few glances that spoke more than entire poems could ever capture. And though she had left with her secret intact, she knew she was standing at the edge of a precipice, one step away from falling completely. The night air was thick with the scent of roses and damp earth when Katerina, cloaked once more in Alexander's skin, slipped through the winding paths of the palace gardens. The moon hung low, painting the marble statues in silver and the hedges in long shadows. Every step was peril. Every moment could spell discovery, yet her heart beat not with fear but with the wild anticipation of knowing Isabella awaited her. The library had been words, questions wrapped in longing, but tonight would be something different. Tonight Isabella had chosen the gardens, a place where moonlight conspired with secrecy, where walls of ivy and archways of stone hid more than gossip could ever reveal. When she found her, Isabella was already there, seated on a marble bench beneath a trellis of white blossoms, her gown flowing around her like liquid light, her golden hair loose and tumbling over her shoulders in defiance of courtly propriety. She looked less like a princess bound by duty and more like a woman daring to step outside of chains. She rose when she saw him, her lips curving into a smile that was at once soft and guarded. "Sir Alexander," she whispered, though no one could hear them here. "I thought perhaps you would not come." Katerina bowed slightly, though her voice carried with it a warmth she could not restrain. "For you, princess, I would walk through fire. A garden in moonlight is a far gentler path." Isabella's laugh was quiet, almost nervous, and she gestured for him to sit beside her. The distance between them was small, yet to Katerina it felt infinite, for her every nerve was alive with the torment of being so near and yet forbidden to reach across the void. They spoke first of trivial things, court matters, and the endless suitors whose names blurred together into a tedious parade. Isabella rolled her eyes delicately, her frustration breaking through the mask of perfection she wore by day. "They all see me as a prize," she said softly, twisting one of the blossoms between her fingers. "None of them see me as me." Katerina's chest tightened. "Then they are blind, princess. For anyone who truly looked would see not a prize, but the brightest soul in this kingdom." Isabella's eyes lifted sharply, catching his with an intensity that made Katerina's breath falter. The blossom fell from her hand, forgotten, as silence stretched heavy between them. "You speak such words with such certainty," Isabella murmured. "And yet you are still a mystery. Why do you hide yourself from me?" Katerina's throat ached with the truth she longed to give, the confession that burned her tongue, but she forced it down, hiding behind Alexander's enigmatic smile. "Some truths are dangerous, your highness. But believe this. Every word I have spoken to you has been honest." Isabella studied him for a long moment, her breath shallow, her lips parting as though to say more, but instead she shook her head slightly, as if scolding herself for the emotions flickering across her face. She rose and began to walk, her gown brushing the grass as Katerina followed, their steps in rhythm along the stone path. They passed through arches of ivy, fountains that whispered like confidants, statues watching with unblinking eyes. When they reached the heart of the garden, hidden by towering hedges, Isabella stopped, turning to face him with a look that left Katerina's heart undone. "Do you know what it means?" Isabella asked, her voice trembling though she tried to keep it steady. "For me to be seen here with you, to summon you like this? If anyone knew, they would condemn us both," Katerina finished gently.
"Yes."
"I know." Isabella's chin lifted, proud and defiant, but her eyes shimmered with something far more fragile. and yet I cannot seem to stop myself." She stepped closer, so close that Katerina could feel the warmth of her body, the delicate brush of her gown against his boots. The world shrank until there was nothing but her, the scent of her perfume, the tremble of her breath, the way her gaze fell to his lips and darted away again. Katerina fought every instinct, every aching desire that screamed to close the distance, to take what she had dreamed of for so long. But it was Isabella who moved first. Her hand rose, tentative but certain, and brushed against his cheek, her fingers trembling as they traced the line of his jaw. "You are not like the others," she whispered, her voice breaking. "When I am with you, I feel alive. As though I am not a princess bound by duty, but simply a woman, free to feel." Katerina's heart fractured with the beauty and agony of it. She leaned into the touch, her eyes closing briefly before opening again, her voice a rasp of honesty slipping past the armor. "That is because I do not see the crown, Isabella. I see you." The name fell from her lips before she could stop it, unadorned by title, raw and dangerous. Isabella's eyes widened, but she did not recoil. Instead, her hand lingered, and for a suspended eternity, they stood there, the air between them heavy with the inevitability of what neither dared name. Katerina lowered her head just slightly, her lips hovering a breath away from Isabella's, every fiber of her being on fire, waiting for a sign, for permission, for a miracle. Isabella's eyes fluttered shut, her lips parting in surrender, when suddenly the sound of footsteps shattered the spell. Voices, muffled but drawing closer, guards patrolling the gardens. Isabella gasped, pulling back, her hand slipping from his cheek as panic flashed to her eyes. "You must go," she whispered urgently. "If they find you here." Katerina seized her hand briefly, pressing it to her lips in a gesture both reverent and desperate. "Say the word, and I will return." Isabella's eyes softened, her face torn between fear and longing. "Then return," she breathed, before releasing him. Katerina melted into the shadows, her cloak blending with the darkness, her heart thundering with equal parts rapture and torment. She had come within a heartbeat of tasting what she had only dreamed, and though the moment had been stolen from her, it had left her with certainty. Isabella wanted her, not just the cavalier, but something deeper, something dangerous. Yet as she slipped back into the safety of her chambers, shedding Alexander's cloak and staring at her reflection in the mirror, the weight of reality pressed hard upon her shoulders. Damien's eyes followed her in every corridor, suspicion burning hotter with each passing day. The court was a nest of vipers, waiting for the chance to strike. And still, she would go to Isabella again. She could not stop herself any more than the tide could resist the pull of the moon. The palace at night was a labyrinth of shadows and silence, yet Katerina moved through it with the confidence of one who had learned to breathe danger as easily as air. Her cloak trailed behind her, boots muffled on the carpets, every corner another risk, every flicker of torchlight another chance at discovery. Yet none of it mattered, not when Isabella had sent for her again. This time the message had not been cloaked in subtlety, not hidden in roses or entrusted to trembling servants. It had been a single glance across the hall that afternoon, Isabella's eyes meeting Alexander's with such urgency that Katerina understood at once. Come tonight. And so she did, drawn by a force greater than reason, greater than fear, greater even than the danger that stalked her in the form of Damien's unrelenting suspicion. The princess's chambers lay beyond guarded doors and velvet-draped corridors, but Katerina knew the secret routes, the hidden staircases servants whispered of, but rarely used. She reached the antechamber with her pulse racing, her hand tightening on the latch before she pushed it open to reveal Isabella's standing by the window, bathed in moonlight. She wore a gown of soft silk, pale as the night sky, her hair unbound, cascading over her shoulders in waves that shimmered silver in the moon's glow. At the sight of Alexander, her lips parted in a breathless smile, relief flooding her features as though she had been holding her breath for hours. "You came," she whispered, though her voice carried more than surprise. It carried need. Katerina bowed, her smirk carefully in place, but her chest ached with the sheer beauty of her. "As I told you, princess, summon me and I will come. Always." Isabella's smile deepened, yet her hands trembled as she clasped them together. "If anyone were to find us," she began, but her voice faltered, the warning dying in her throat as her eyes lingered on him, wide and luminous with something raw. "Let them," Katerina said softly, though the words were reckless, though she knew they could cost her everything. "Tonight there is only us." Isabella crossed the chamber, her silk gown whispering against the marble floor, each step sending Katerina's heart pounding harder. When she reached him, she lifted her hand, hesitated, then laid her palm gently against his chest, feeling the steady thrum of his heartbeat beneath the fabric of his doublet. "You are so sure of yourself, Sir Alexander," she murmured, though her voice quivered. "But I am not sure of anything anymore." Katerina's hand rose to cover hers, her fingers warm against Isabella's delicate skin. "Then be sure of this," she said, her voice breaking despite Alexander's practiced calm. "You are not alone in your uncertainty." Isabella's breath trembled as she looked up at him, her eyes reflecting the moonlight, her lips parted as though caught between fear and desire. "Tell me something true," she whispered. "Something only you could say." Katerina's throat tightened, the truth clawing at her chest, begging to be freed, yet she could not shatter the fragile dream. So she chose a truth that was not the whole truth, but truth enough. "When I am near you, the world disappears," she said hoarsely. "There is no crown, no court, no danger. Only you." Isabella exhaled sharply, as though struck, and before Katerina could think, could breathe, could remind herself of the cost, Isabella's hand slid from her chest to the curve of her neck, pulling her down until their lips met. The kiss was tentative at first, trembling, tasting of hesitation and longing, but it deepened in an instant, as though years of restraint had finally crumbled into dust. Katerina's world spun, her heart breaking and mending all at once as she wrapped her arms around the woman she had loved in silence for so long. Isabella clung to her, her fingers tangling in Alexander's cloak, her body pressing against his with desperate need. The kiss was not just passion, it was defiance, a rebellion against a world that would never allow them this, and yet they claimed it anyway, if only for a stolen moment. When they finally broke apart, breathless and trembling, Isabella pressed her forehead against his, her eyes closed, tears glistening at the edges. "What are we doing?" she whispered, her voice both frightened and exhilarated. Katerina's hand cupped her cheek, her thumb brushing away the trace of moisture. "We are living," she whispered back. "For once, we are living." Isabella's lips trembled into a fragile smile, and she kissed him again, fiercer this time, bolder, as though something inside her had snapped free. They stumbled back toward the bed, not with the intention of surrendering to every impulse, but because the need to be close, to be unmasked of duty, was too strong to resist. They sank onto the edge, Isabella's hands fisting in his doublet, Katerina's heart shattering with the knowledge that she could never give her all truth, yet unable to deny her any part of her love. Their kisses slowed, softened, until Isabella pulled back, her breath shaky, her eyes searching Alexander's as though she might finally see past the mask. "You are hiding something," she whispered, not accusing but aching. Katerina's heart thundered, panic rising, but before she could speak, Isabella pressed a finger gently against his lips. "Do not tell me," she whispered, her eyes shimmering. "Not tonight. Tonight, I only want to feel." Katerina kissed her fingertip reverently, her chest breaking with the tenderness of it. They lay side by side upon the silk covers, clothed, hearts pressed together, the world outside the chamber disappearing into irrelevance. Isabella's head rested against his chest, her breath steadying as her hand remained curled against his heart. For the first time in her life, Katerina felt whole, even if it was only built on lies, even if the truth threatened to destroy everything. She closed her eyes, letting herself believe in the impossible, if only for the span of a night. But beyond the locked door, danger grew. Damien's humiliation burned hotter with each day, and now he had spies trailing Alexander's every move, shadows slipping through alleys, servants bribed for whispers. The court might be charmed by mystery, but Damien hungered for truth, and he would stop at nothing until he held it in his hands. And if he succeeded, the fragile dream Isabella and Katerina had stolen tonight would be torn apart before it could even bloom. The palace no longer felt safe. It was as though the very walls had grown eyes, the tapestry's ears, the corridors' mouths ready to whisper betrayal. Katerina felt it every time she donned Alexander's cloak, every time she walked with the swagger of the cavalier, every time a servant's gaze lingered too long or a guard's expression hardened with suspicion. Damien was moving, unseen but everywhere, pulling threads of doubt tighter and tighter. Rumors swelled in the court like a rising tide, that Alexander's lineage was false, that his sudden appearance hid scandal, that perhaps he was not who he claimed to be at all. Katerina wore Alexander's smirk like armor, but beneath it, fear gnawed at her. Still, she could not stay away. Not from Isabella. The princess had become her moon, her gravity, her every breath, and though danger pressed closer, she found herself answering every unspoken summons, every longing glance. It was in the starlit gardens again that Isabella waited, cloaked this time, her face shadowed by the hood of her mantle, her hands trembling as she reached for his when he arrived. "I thought you wouldn't come," she whispered, though the relief in her voice betrayed how much she had needed him. Katerina took her hands, holding them firmly, her voice steady despite the storm inside. "If you call, I will always come." Isabella's lips trembled into a smile, but it faltered as her eyes studied him, filled with shadows of doubt. "They are speaking of you," she murmured. Whispers, questions, suspicions. "Damien, he poisons the air with his words. He says you are a fraud, that you cannot be trusted, that you—" She broke off, her voice catching, as though the thought itself wounded her. Katerina lifted her hand to Isabella's cheek, silencing her gently. "Damien's words are worth less than ash," she said softly, though she knew the danger was real. "He envies what he cannot have. He envies you." Isabella leaned into the touch, closing her eyes briefly before looking back at him, her expression torn between longing and fear. "And what are you, Alexander? Who are you? Every time I look at you, I feel as though I am standing on the edge of a precipice, and I don't know whether to step back or fall." Katerina's chest ached, her secret pressing against her ribs like a blade. She wanted to tell her, to tear away the mask and let Isabella see her for who she truly was. But terror held her tongue, the terror of losing everything, of watching Isabella's admiration turn to horror, of seeing her love shatter like glass. Instead, she lowered her gaze, her voice low and rough. "Perhaps I am the fall, princess. And perhaps you are the only one who makes me want to jump." Isabella's breath caught, her hands tightening on his as though afraid to let go. "You speak like a poet," she whispered. "But words will not protect us. If Damien discovers even a fraction of your secrets," she trailed off, her fear heavy in the air. "Then let him discover only envy," Katerina replied, leaning closer, her forehead brushing against Isabella's. "Let him see that he will never have what I have found in you." Their lips met again, this time with no hesitation, no trembling. Isabella's kiss was fierce, desperate, as though trying to claim something before it could be stolen away. Katerina held her tightly, her heart breaking with the sheer intensity of it, knowing every moment was borrowed, knowing the storm was closing in. They broke apart only when footsteps echoed in the distance, laughter and voices carrying through the hedges. Isabella pulled back, her breath ragged, her hood falling away to reveal her flushed face. "Come to me tomorrow night," she whispered urgently. "Not here. Not the gardens. My chambers. I cannot bear these stolen fragments anymore. I need—" Her voice faltered, but her eyes said what words could not. Katerina kissed her hands fervently, nodding. "Tomorrow," she vowed. "I will come." They parted swiftly, Isabella vanishing into the shadows of the palace, her mantle billowing like wings, Katerina slipping the opposite way, her heart ablaze with both rapture and dread. For even as love blossomed dangerously between them, danger thickened like smoke. That very night, Damien's spies reported back to him. They had followed Alexander into the lesser halls, seen him vanish into places where no nobleman lingered, and though they had not uncovered the full truth, they brought enough to feed Damien's hunger. He sat in his chamber, swirling wine in his goblet, his lips curling into a cruel smile. "Soon," he murmured, "soon the mask will slip." And as Katerina shed Alexander's cloak in the solitude of her chamber, her reflection staring back at her with wide, terrified eyes, she knew in her bones that time was running out. Yet still, she would go to Isabella. Even if it meant ruin, even if it meant the end of them both. The palace was hushed, but Katerina's blood was anything but calm as she moved through the labyrinthine corridors once more, Alexander's cloak wrapped tightly around her shoulders. Every shadow felt sharper tonight, every whisper of wind through the windows louder, as though the entire castle itself held its breath. Damien's eyes were everywhere now, and she knew stepping into Isabella's chambers was the boldest act of defiance she had ever dared. Yet she could no more stay away than she could stop her own heart from beating. Isabella had asked for her, had pleaded for her presence, and that need was stronger than fear. She reached the princess's door with her pulse hammering like a war drum, and when it opened, Isabella herself stood there, unhood, her hair cascading loose over her shoulders, her gown soft and pale, her eyes shimmering with a mixture of relief and desperation. She pulled him inside at once, shutting the door behind them with a trembling hand, and for a moment they simply stood together, the silence between them alive with everything unsaid. Then Isabella stepped closer, her voice breaking. "I could not sleep," she confessed. "Not with thoughts of you tormenting me. I hear Damien's venom in the halls, I hear the whispers in every chamber, but when I close my eyes, all I see is you." Katerina's breath caught, her carefully constructed mask threatening to shatter. "Then let me be the one truth among their lies," she whispered, her hand rising to cradle Isabella's face. The princess leaned into the touch, her eyes closing briefly, then opening again with a fire that burned away all hesitation. "I cannot bear it any longer," she whispered. "I cannot keep pretending that I am only a princess meant for a throne. I am a woman, and I—" Her voice faltered, tears glistening at the corners of her eyes as though the weight of her confession might undo her. Katerina pressed her forehead against Isabella's, her voice raw. "Say it." Isabella's lips trembled. "I love you." The words fell like a blade and a blessing all at once, cutting Katerina open and mending her in the same breath. Her heart broke with the beauty of it, because Isabella had spoken the one truth she had yearned for, even if it was for Alexander, not for the woman behind the mask. Tears stung her eyes, but she kissed Isabella fiercely, desperately, pouring into her lips all the years of silence, the ache of every stolen glance, the unbearable joy of finally being loved in return. Isabella clung to her, her fingers curling into Alexander's doublet as though anchoring herself against the storm of the world. They stumbled together toward the bed, not in haste but in hunger for closeness, for the kind of intimacy denied them by crowns and masks. They sank onto the silk covers, their kisses feverish, their hands exploring the edges of propriety and pushing past them until the weight of their desire was too much to resist. They lay tangled together, bodies pressed close, Isabella's head resting against Alexander's chest, her breath uneven, her words a trembling prayer. "If the world knew, they would tear us apart," she whispered. "But I do not care anymore. I would choose you no matter the cost." Katerina held her tighter, her chest aching with love and fear. "And I would choose you, even if it meant standing against the world." For a moment they lay in silence, hearts beating in unison, the impossible dream made real by the strength of their defiance. But beyond the chamber doors, reality closed in. Damien had not been idle. His spies had followed Alexander, shadowing his every move, and tonight they had led him here. He stood now in the corridor, his smirk cruel, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword as he gestured for the guards he had bribed to wait in silence. He pressed his ear to the door, hearing the muffled voices, the intimacy in the tones, and his smile widened like a blade. Soon the mask would fall, and when it did, the entire kingdom would know. Inside, Katerina froze suddenly, her instincts prickling with the sense of being watched. She pulled back from Isabella, her breath catching, her eyes darting toward the door. Isabella frowned, alarm flickering across her features. "What is it?" she whispered. Katerina shook her head, forcing a smile, though dread coiled in her stomach. "Nothing," she lied, but already she knew something was wrong. She kissed Isabella again, softer this time, trying to memorize the feel of her lips, the warmth of her body, as though preparing for a storm. She could not stop. Outside, Damien motioned to the guards, his eyes gleaming with triumph. The trap was ready. All that remained was to spring it. The dawn of the great council day arrived heavy with expectation, the palace alive with murmurs of the duel that had not yet been fought, of the suitors still vying for the princess's hand, of Damien's simmering wrath. Yet beneath the polished surface of ceremony, a darker current moved, for Damien had prepared his trap and would spring it before the court's eyes. Katerina dressed once more as Sir Alexander, her doublet immaculate, her blade polished, her mask of confidence fixed to her face like steel. Yet her heart thundered with dread, for she knew the walls were closing in. Isabella had begged her to be careful, had whispered her love into her lips the night before, but Katerina had made her vow, no matter what happened, she would not allow Damien to win. The council chamber was vast, filled with nobles draped in jewels, their whispers a storm of envy and curiosity. At the dais sat King Alden, weary yet commanding, with Isabella at his side, radiant and poised despite the shadows in her eyes. When Alexander entered, a ripple of attention moved through the chamber, admiration and suspicion twining together. Damien rose from his place, his smile sharp as glass. "Your Majesty," he declared, his voice carrying through the hall, "I cannot remain silent any longer. This so-called knight, this Sir Alexander, is no man of honor. He is a deceiver, a fraud, and I have the proof." Gasps broke out across the chamber. Katerina stood tall, her jaw clenched, her hand resting lightly on her sword hilt, but inside her stomach coiled with terror. Damien strode forward, his gaze gleaming with triumph. "For weeks he has bewitched us all with his mystery, with his false gallantry, but I have followed him. I have seen him vanish into corridors meant only for women. I have heard the whispers of servants bought with coin. And now, before the court and crown, I shall unmask him for what he truly is." He lunged, his hand gripping Katerina's cloak, yanking it aside, his fingers tearing at her doublet until fabric ripped and her chest, bound tightly beneath, betrayed the curve of what had been hidden. A collective gasp filled the chamber like thunder. Silence followed, heavy and crushing, as all eyes widened in shock. Katerina's heart stopped. The mask had fallen. "A woman," Damien spat, his voice dripping with venom. "This entire time, a woman dared deceive us, dared to mock this court, dared to lay her filthy hands upon our princess." The crowd erupted, voices clashing, some outraged, some scandalized, some stunned into silence. Katerina stood frozen, her disguise shattered, her entire life poised to collapse in ruin. She turned her gaze upward to Isabella, and in that instant the world slowed. The princess rose from her seat, her silver gown catching the light, her eyes blazing not with betrayal, but with defiance. "Enough!" Isabella's voice rang through the chamber, silencing the tumult with the force of command. She descended the dais, her steps echoing, until she stood at Katerina's side. Her hand reached for Katerina's, intertwining their fingers before the eyes of all. Gasps echoed again, but Isabella did not falter. "Yes, she is a woman," she said, her voice steady and proud. "And she is also the bravest, most honorable soul I have ever known. She is the one who stood against Damien's arrogance, the one who showed me what it means to be seen not as a crown, but as a person. And she is the one I choose. Not as Sir Alexander, not as Katerina, but as the woman I love." The chamber erupted once more, but this time it was chaos. Shouts of protest, cries of disbelief, but also murmurs of admiration from those bold enough to recognize the courage unfolding before them. King Alden rose, his face grave, his gaze sweeping between his daughter and the unmasked Katerina. "Isabella," he said, his voice heavy. "Do you understand what you are saying?" The weight of the throne, the expectation of the crown. Isabella turned to him, her chin lifting, her grip on Katerina's hand tightening. "I understand," she said firmly, "but I will not live a life forged in lies to appease tradition. I will not give my heart to a man I do not love, nor will I let this kingdom dictate whom I may cherish. If I am to be queen, then let me rule with truth, not chains." The king's eyes softened, pride warring with duty in his gaze. For a long moment, silence hung, broken only by Damien's enraged sputtering. "You cannot allow this, Majesty," he shouted, his face red with fury. "It is an abomination, a scandal that will disgrace us all. This which has bewitched your daughter." His words were cut short as Isabella turned on him, her voice sharp as steel. "No, Damien. The only disgrace here is your envy, your cruelty, and your arrogance. You speak of honor, yet you would drag a woman through the mud for daring to stand against you. You have lost, not because of deception, but because you never deserved me." Damien's face twisted with rage, and he drew his sword, lunging at Katerina in desperation. But this time Katerina was ready. With a swift motion, she drew her blade, steel clashing against steel, their duel blazing through the chamber before the stunned court. Damien's strikes were fueled by fury, wild and reckless, but Katerina fought with precision, with control, with the strength of knowing she had nothing left to hide. With one deft maneuver, she disarmed him, sending his sword skittering across the marble. The point of her blade hovered at his chest, her voice steady and calm. "You speak of honor, Damien, yet you have none. Yield." His face twisted with humiliation, but faced with the jeers of the court and the steel at his heart, he could do nothing but fall to his knees, defeated. Katerina lowered her blade, stepping back, her chest heaving. Isabella rushed to her side, her hands gripping hers, her eyes shining with tears. "It is done," she whispered, and Katerina could scarcely believe it. The king raised his hand for silence, his gaze grave yet resolute. "So be it," he declared. "Let the court hear my words. My daughter's heart is her own. If she chooses this woman, Katerina, then she chooses not with shame, but with courage. And as long as I am king, none shall dare to strip her of that right." The chamber erupted once more, but this time applause joined the cries, ripples of admiration spreading even among those who had doubted. Isabella turned to Katerina, her smile radiant, her eyes alight with triumph. And before the eyes of the entire kingdom, she kissed her, fiercely, proudly, without fear. The world could do nothing but watch as two women, bound by love, defied centuries of chains. That night, the palace whispered still, but the whispers had changed. They were no longer about mystery or scandal, but about courage, about love that had faced the storm and endured. Katerina and Isabella stood together, hand in hand, ready to shape a new world. Their love was no longer a secret, no longer stolen in shadows. It was truth, blazing bright, unbreakable. And it was only the beginning. Katerina and Isabella, hand in hand, win not only each other, but the right to live openly, proving love stronger than tradition, envy, and fear. The months that followed their defiance of tradition were not without trials, but they were no longer lived in shadows. The court, once a den of whispers and venom, became a stage where Katerina walked openly not as Sir Alexander but as herself, the woman who had captured the heart of a princess and had dared to defy a kingdom. There were protests, of course, nobles who fumed, priests who railed against the sacrilege, rivals who muttered of scandal, but against their noise stood Isabella, radiant and unshakable, her crown shining brighter for the truth she bore with pride. And at her side was Katerina, no longer hiding, no longer splitting herself into masks. The first weeks were the hardest. Every banquet was a test, every audience with foreign emissaries a careful balance of diplomacy and courage. But each time doubt threatened to spread, Isabella silenced it with grace, reminding all that a queen who ruled with love was stronger than one who bowed to empty tradition. The people, who had once been taught to accept only what the court decreed, began to see something different, a love that was not cold or political but fierce, genuine, human. Whispers turned to curiosity, curiosity to admiration, and admiration, slowly, to loyalty. On the day Isabella was crowned queen, the great square of the capital overflowed with people. Bells rang across the city, petals rained from balconies, and at her side stood Caterina, dressed not in borrowed disguises, but in garments of her own, cut in the style of a knight yet adorned with the emblems of the crown. When the crown was placed upon Isabella's golden hair, she turned not to the assembled court but to Caterina, her hand reaching for hers. The gesture was small, but before the eyes of an entire kingdom, it carried the weight of a revolution. From that day forward, they ruled together, not as monarch and consort bound by hollow vows, but as partners bound by truth. Caterina found a place in the court not as a fraud, but as Isabella's protector, advisor, and equal. Though she held no official title, the people began to call her the Shadow Knight, the blade and heart of the queen, the woman who had stepped from the shadows to stand in the light. Their love flourished openly. No longer stolen glances, no longer hurried kisses in moonlit gardens, but mornings spent walking hand in hand through the rose gardens, laughter echoing in the halls, evenings spent reading by the fire with Isabella's head resting against Caterina's shoulder. They learned each other not only in passion but in peace, Isabella's quick wit balancing Caterina's quiet strength, Caterina's stubborn resolve softening under Isabella's radiant joy. And when the nights came, they no longer feared discovery. Their bed was not a place of secrecy, but of sanctuary, where they could love without restraint, where Caterina whispered her truths against Isabella's skin, where Isabella traced the scars of deception turned into triumph. Damien's name faded into obscurity, his exile sealing the end of his poisonous reign of envy. The courtiers who had sneered learned silence, and the kingdom that had once chained its women to roles not of their choosing began, slowly, to change. Laws softened, doors opened, the impossible began to seem possible. And at the heart of it all was a queen and the woman she loved, proof that even in the strictest of kingdoms, love could blaze a path where none had dared to tread. Years later, when bards sang of their reign, they told not of treaties or wars, but of the night a princess chose courage over duty and a woman cast off her mask to reveal the truth of her heart. They told of dances that began as deception and ended as destiny, of gardens that bore witness to forbidden touches turned sacred, of a love that defied tradition and built a future. And in the quiet of their chambers, long after the world had fallen silent, Isabella and Caterina would lie side by side, their hands entwined, their crowns forgotten on gilded stands, and smile at the memory of how it had all begun. A dance,
A lie.
a secret, and a love strong enough to change everything. Thank you so much for being here and for believing in this channel. If you feel in your heart, you can donate with super thanks so I can focus more and more on this project. Your support helps me keep creating these love stories and bringing them to life for you. See you in the next video.